Welcome back, listeners. Today we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of argumentation.
Oh, yeah. It's going to be good.
Have you ever felt like you're being tricked by a clever talker,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't quite put your finger on why?
All the time.
Well, we're going to equip you with a secret weapon today.
Okay. I like secret weapons. Hit me.
The ability to spot logical fallacies. These are like little cracks, in the foundation of an argument
Cracks in the foundation. Okay.
that make it shaky or even, well, completely invalid.
Interesting.
And we're basing this deep dive on How to Win Every Argument, a great book. By the end of this episode, you'll be, what's the word?
A master debater.
A fallacy spotting ninja.
Ooh, I like that. A fallacy spotting ninja.
Some fallacies, they're everywhere, right?
Oh, they are absolutely everywhere. It's amazing.
I mean, from political debates to social media arguments to, like, everyday conversations.
You start noticing them, and then you can't unsee them. It's like a whole new layer of awareness.
Right. Speaking of which, have you ever been in a discussion where someone just totally oversimplifies your viewpoint? Just to, like, knock it down easily?
Uh-huh.
That, my friend, is a classic straw man fallacy.
Yeah. The straw man. It's so common. The book actually uses a good example, Darwin and evolution.
Okay, yeah.
Think about how often you hear someone say, oh, so you think we came from monkeys?
Right.
That completely misrepresents the complexity of evolutionary theory, right?
Totally. It's so frustrating because they're not actually engaging with your real argument.
No,
Right.
not even a little bit.
They built this flimsy straw man version of it just to tear it down. And what's fascinating to me is how this can be used to manipulate public opinion. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Politicians, media commentators, they often use straw men to discredit opposing viewpoints, right?
Yeah.
They present a distorted version of their opponent's stance, make it easier to attack, and then they try to sway the audience.
So it's not just about winning an argument. It's about controlling the narrative.
Exactly. Now, this next one might sound pretty familiar. Imagine you're in a heated debate,
Right.
and suddenly the other person throws in a completely unrelated point.
Yeah.
Like, well, what about that time you forgot to?
Ugh, that's the worst.
Classic red herring, designed to pull the focus away from the real issue.
Oh, man, I've been on the receiving end of that so many times. It's so frustrating, especially when you're trying to have, like, a productive conversation.
Right.
It's just misdirection. The book had a really funny example. Someone's suspiciously eyeing that diamond necklace you've got,
Okay, yeah.
and then you just blurt out, "Nice dog you have there." Total misdirection.
Exactly. It's all about derailing the conversation and avoiding accountability. You see this a lot in public relations
Oh, yeah.
and crisis management, right?
Yeah.
When a company's facing a scandal, they might try to distract the public by releasing like a feel-good story or highlighting a charitable donation.
It's like a magician, right?
Probably.
Waving a shiny object to distract you from what their other hand is doing.
Exactly. So do you think people use these fallacies intentionally? Or is it more of like an unconscious thing?
That's a good question. What do you think?
You know, it's probably a mix of both, right? Some people, they're very skilled at using these tactics deliberately, right?
Yeah.
To manipulate others.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of the time people use fallacies without even realizing it. You know, they might genuinely believe that they're making a valid point, even if their logic is flawed.
That makes sense. It's like they've learned these patterns of argumentation, but they've never, like, really questioned whether they're valid or not.
Right, exactly.
Speaking of shifting arguments, have you ever noticed how some people just can't admit they're wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Even when you present them with, like, solid evidence,
Mm.
they just subtly shift their position to avoid being, refuted.
Oh, the shifting ground fallacy. That's a good one. It's like trying to nail jelly to a wall. The book uses a great example from politics. Imagine a party, they just got crushed in an election, right?
Yeah.
Instead of acknowledging defeat, they're like, you know what? This experience, it actually strengthened us.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that one.
It allowed us to connect with the people.
It's like they're trying to redefine reality to fit their narrative.
Uh-huh.
Makes you wonder if they even believe what they're saying.
Right.
Okay, so have you ever met someone who just seems to hold themselves to a different standard than everyone else?
Oh, all the time. All the time.
Yeah.
It's like they have one set of rules for themselves and another set for everybody else.
Totally.
Classic example of special pleading. They demand special treatment or exemptions without any, like, real justification.
It's like comparing capitalism, with all its real-world flaws to some idealized theoretical version of socialism. Not exactly a fair comparison.
No, not at all.
It's such a common tactic. But once you recognize it, it's so transparent. So we've covered a few fallacies that rely on leaving out key information.
Right.
Now let's move on. Let's dive into ones that make bold presumptions
Okay. Yeah.
without proper justification.
All right. Get ready for some real gems. These fallacies can be especially dangerous because they often tack into our emotions and biases.
Okay, bring them on. And I bet our listeners are ready to. So this next fallacy is probably one that we've all experienced. It's that moment when, instead of addressing your actual point, someone just attacks you personally.
Oh, yeah.
Like, well, you would say that, wouldn't you?
Uh,
And then they just throw in some irrelevant personal detail.
Ah, yes. The ad hominem attack.
Mhm.
Classic way to discredit someone without actually engaging with their ideas. The book actually gives an example, like, how can you listen to anything this person says? They were convicted of fraud 10 years ago.
It's a low blow. But
Right.
unfortunately, it can be effective. It plays on our natural tendency to, judge people
Yeah.
based on their past mistakes or personal characteristics.
Right. And it shifts the focus from the issue at hand to the character of the individual, which is rarely productive.
Have you ever noticed how some people justify their beliefs by just saying, well, everyone knows that, or everyone agrees that? Like, that just makes it true.
That's the argumentum ad populum fallacy in action.
There it is.
Appealing to popular opinion as evidence,
Yeah.
which, of course, is completely illogical.
Totally.
Just because a lot of people believe something doesn't make it true.
Right.
Right.
The book had a chilling example of this with someone saying, are we going to let the streets of our beloved nation be overrun with foreigners?
Wow. Yeah.
That phrase is loaded with, like, emotional appeals to nationalism and xenophobia. It just completely bypasses any, like, rational discussion about immigration policies.
It's a dangerous fallacy
Yeah.
because it can be used to justify, well, all sorts of harmful beliefs and actions. Remember, just because something is popular doesn't make it right.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And you know what? Critical thinking is so important. It's more important than ever, I think, in today's world, where misinformation and emotional appeals are just rampant.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Speaking of emotional appeals, let's talk about wishful thinking.
Okay.
This one is all about accepting something as true, just because you want it to be true,
Ooh, I'm guilty of that.
regardless of the evidence.
Especially when it comes to things like staying in bed will do more good than going to work in this weather.
We've all been there, but unfortunately the world doesn't always conform to our desires no matter how much we wish it would.
I know, I know. Okay, and finally, let's unravel this Latin phrase.
Ooh, Latin.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc. It's a mouthful, but it basically means assuming that just because one event happened after another, the first event must have caused the second.
Right, it's confusing correlation with causation.
Yeah.
The book gives an example about crime rates. Someone blames a recent increase in crime on a new social policy,
Uh-huh.
even though there's no evidence to support a direct causal link.
This one is everywhere. It's so easy to just jump to conclusions and to see patterns where none actually exist. I feel like through this conversation, we're starting to see the world through new eyes. Oh, I know, right? Spotting these fallacies everywhere we look.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the first step to becoming a more critical thinker.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing these patterns of flawed reasoning is essential
Mm.
for navigating the world of information and for making, sound judgments.
Couldn't agree more.
Right. It's amazing how our brains are just like wired to see patterns.
I know, right? Even when they're not really there.
Totally.
It's like our minds are constantly searching for explanations,
Yeah.
even if those explanations are based on, well, faulty logic.
Right.
Speaking of faulty logic, this next fallacy, it's all about using misleading comparisons.
Okay.
Like that old saying, comparing apples to oranges.
Oh, yeah. That's a great analogy
Right.
for the abusive analogy fallacy.
Okay, the abusive analogy.
It's about attacking someone's argument.
Right.
By comparing it to something that's just totally ridiculous or irrelevant, just hoping to make them look foolish.
Right.
The book had a funny example about sailing. Someone suggests a sailing trip, right?
Yeah.
And the other person just goes, yeah, right. You know as much about ships as an Armenian band leader,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that even have to do with anything?
It's a clever way to dismiss someone's expertise without actually addressing their argument.
Exactly.
Okay, so have you ever noticed how some people resist any kind of change
Oh, yeah, all the time.
just by clinging to tradition? It's like they're saying, well, we've always done it this way, so it must be the right way.
That's the argumentum ad antiquitatem fallacy in action.
Yeah.
It's appealing to tradition as a justification,
Yeah.
for continuing a practice or belief, even when there might be better alternatives.
Right,
The
right.
book points out how this is often used to resist innovation.
Oh, yeah.
So imagine someone arguing against a new policy, and they say, this is how things have always been done, and it's worked perfectly fine.
I can hear it now.
Right?
It's like clinging to an old map,
Mm,
even though the world has changed.
totally. Sometimes, yeah, tradition can be valuable,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't be the sole basis for decision making.
Right. Okay, this next one sounds kind of intense. Argumentum ad baculum. Does that involve like force or something?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
This fallacy uses threats
Mm-hmm.
or intimidation
Mm-hmm.
to persuade someone to accept an argument.
So it's basically like saying, agree with me or else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The book had a pretty chilling example,
Yeah.
actually.
Oh, no. What is it?
It says, it would be in your best interest to tell us what we want to know. After all, we wouldn't want anything to happen to your family, would we?
Whoa. Okay, that escalated quickly. That's a stark reminder that not all arguments are based on like reason and evidence.
Right.
Sometimes it's just fear
Mm.
and coercion
Yeah,
that are used to silence dissent.
exactly. It's a tactic that's often used by like authoritarian regimes or individuals in positions of power.
Mm-hmm. Okay, have you ever felt trapped in a conversation where you're presented with two options and they're both bad?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's like, pick your poison.
Right. Like either you support this policy or you're unpatriotic.
Ugh, that's the bifurcation fallacy, also known as the false dilemma.
False dilemma. Okay.
It presents a situation as if there are only two possible choices, when in reality, there might be many other options.
Hmm.
Or a more nuanced perspective.
Right.
The book uses a political example, and it's so relevant today.
What is it?
If you're not with us, you're against us.
Right.
It forces people to choose sides and creates, like, unnecessary division.
It's a way to oversimplify a complex issue and just shut down any critical thinking.
Exactly. You see this a lot in, like, polarized political debates.
Oh, yeah, all the
Right.
time.
Right.
Okay, have you ever been in a conversation where someone throws a bunch of jargon at you, technical terms, all that stuff,
Oh, yeah, all the time.
to make it seem like they know what they're talking about, even if their argument doesn't really hold up?
Oh, yeah. They're trying to, like, blind you with science.
Yes.
Right. That's exactly what the blinding with science fallacy is all about.
Blinding with science.
It uses complex language or technical jargon, right,
Mhm.
to overwhelm the audience
Mhm.
and to create an illusion of expertise, even if the argument, like, totally lacks substance.
Right.
The book had an example with some very impressive sounding, but ultimately meaningless jargon.
Okay, let's hear it.
Alrighty. The motivational syndrome is sustained by peer group pressure, except where achievement orientation forms a dominant aspect of the educational and social milieu.
Okay, that sounds very smart.
Right. But if you break it down, it's just saying people are less motivated if their friends aren't motivated.
So basically using big words to sound smart
Right.
without actually saying anything meaningful.
Exactly. It's a tactic often used by, like, pseudoscientists
Oh.
or those trying to sell you something.
Yeah. It's a good reminder to always question the evidence, no matter how fancy the language sounds.
Absolutely. Don't be afraid to, like, ask for clarification or to challenge an argument that seems overly complicated. Speaking complicated, this next fallacy, it's like a logical pretzel.
Okay, a logical pretzel. I love it.
It's called the bogus dilemma.
Okay, how does that one work?
It's similar to the false dilemma.
Yeah.
But with a twist. It presents a situation as if there were only two possible choices,
Yeah.
right? Both of which are undesirable. When in reality, there might be other, like, more favorable options. The book uses a classic example from ancient Greece.
Okay.
And so a mother tells her son who wants to go into politics, she's like, don't do it. If you tell the truth, people will hate you. And if you lie, the gods will hate you. So no matter what you do, you'll be hated.
Wow, that's a lose-lose situation.
Right. But it's a false choice because there are probably other ways to, approach politics,
Yeah.
maybe by finding a balance between truth and diplomacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The bogus dilemma, it's often used to manipulate people,
Mm.
to make them feel trapped, or to justify inaction, by making it seem like there are no good solutions.
Right. It's like saying we either raise taxes or cut essential services. There's no other choice.
Yeah, yeah. When in reality, there might be other, like, creative solutions or compromises.
Right. Most complex issues, they have more than two, like, simplistic solutions.
Mm.
Okay, this next fallacy, it might make your head spin a bit.
Okay, bring it on. I'm ready.
It's called circulus in probando,
Circulus improbando.
or circular reasoning.
Circular reasoning. Okay, so that sounds like it goes nowhere.
You got it. It's an argument that uses the conclusion as evidence for the premise, creating a circular loop that doesn't actually prove anything.
So it's like saying A is true because B is true, and B is true because A is true.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's like, I'm the leader because I have the magic sword, and I have the magic sword because I'm the leader. It doesn't really explain anything.
Exactly. The book had an example about a diamond.
A diamond, okay.
It's like, I have the diamond, so I should be the leader, but why should you get to keep the diamond? Because I'm the leader.
Oh, okay, I get it. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy that doesn't provide any real justification. You see this a lot in arguments about authority or power, right?
Yes, definitely. Where the claim to authority is based on a circular argument.
Mm-hmm. It's a way to just assert power without actually demonstrating any legitimate basis for it.
Right. Okay, this next fallacy, it's like a trick question designed to catch you off guard. It's called the complex question.
Ooh, a complex question.
Yeah.
Okay, sensing some wordplay here.
You got it. This fallacy combines multiple questions into one, right? It forces like a yes or no answer.
Mm-hmm.
That might not accurately reflect the person's true beliefs or actions. The most classic example, are you ready for it?
Hit me.
Have you stopped beating your wife?
Whoa. Okay, yeah, I've heard that one.
Right. No matter how you answer, you're either admitting to like past abuse or implying that you're still doing it.
That's a loaded question for sure. It's designed to trap the person into making like a damaging admission. You often see this in like interrogations or courtroom dramas.
Right, exactly. It's a way to manipulate someone into saying something that they don't really mean.
Yeah.
Or to create a false impression of guilt. Okay, this next fallacy, it plays on our tendency to make assumptions about groups of people.
Okay. So like stereotypes.
Exactly. The composition fallacy assumes that what's true for the parts must also be true for the whole. For example, someone might argue, farmers benefit from price supports on beef. Shoemakers gain from price supports on shoes, and so on. Therefore, the whole economy would benefit if all products were subsidized.
Right.
Okay, yeah. But that logic, it doesn't really hold up.
No, not really.
Just because something works for one group, it doesn't mean it'll work for everyone.
Right. It reminds me of that saying, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Right, which isn't always true. Not always true. It's important to consider the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And the potential unintended consequences of applying a principle to a larger scale.
Okay, so have you ever heard someone make a sweeping statement?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Like, lawyers are all greedy, or the politicians are all corrupt, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's like they're painting everyone with the same brush.
Right.
That's the concealed quantification fallacy.
Concealed quantification, okay.
It makes a statement that could refer to all or some members of a class, right? And that leads to ambiguity and potential misunderstandings. The book gives an example. Using garage mechanics.
Okay.
Imagine someone saying garage mechanics are crooks. But do they mean all mechanics or just some mechanics?
Right.
The statement doesn't specify, so it allows for a lot of misinterpretation.
Yeah, it's a way to make a strong claim without actually, like, providing any evidence to support it.
Right.
And it can be used to justify all sorts of prejudices and generalizations.
Absolutely. It's important to be aware of this fallacy and to challenge statements that make sweeping generalizations about entire groups of people.
For sure. Okay, this next one sounds like a recipe for a headache. The conclusion which denies premises.
Oh yeah, this one's a bit of a logical loop-de-loop.
A logical loop-de-loop, okay.
This fallacy, it starts with premises that support a certain conclusion.
Right.
Right? But then it ends with a conclusion that contradicts those premises.
So it's like saying everything has a beginning, therefore God must have created the universe, but God always existed.
Right. It's like, wait, what?
It just doesn't make sense.
Right. It's like trying to build a house on a foundation of sand. The conclusion undermines the very premises it's built on.
Okay, so these types of arguments, they often stem from a desire to, like, reconcile conflicting beliefs, but they end up creating more confusion than clarity.
Exactly. It's a reminder to be consistent in our reasoning.
Yeah.
And to be wary of arguments that seem to, like, contradict themselves.
Right. Speaking of contradictions, this next fallacy is built on a foundation of conflicting ideas.
All right. Bring it on.
It's called contradictory premises.
Contradictory premises. Okay.
So like starting an argument with two opposing statements.
Exactly. This fallacy uses premises that contradict each other.
Right.
So it makes it impossible to, like, draw a valid conclusion. The book gives an example about mortality and divinity. It says,
Okay.
everything is mortal and God is not mortal, so God is not everything. But that doesn't really work, does it?
It's like saying all squares are rectangles and no circles are rectangles, therefore no squares are circles.
Right. The conclusion might be true, but the logic is flawed.
Yeah, the premises create like a paradox that just can't be resolved.
Right. These types of arguments often arise from a lack of clarity in defining terms or from a failure to recognize the inherent inconsistencies in one's beliefs.
Okay, this next fallacy sounds like it plays on our obsession with money.
Okay. Which one is this?
Argumentum ad criminem.
Ad criminem. Okay.
Right. Does that have to do with like wealth or something?
You got it.
Okay.
This fallacy assumes that wealth or, financial success is a measure of truth or correctness. It's the if you're so smart, why aren't you rich argument.
So basically equating financial success with like intelligence or virtue.
Exactly. It's a very materialistic view
Yeah.
that often overlooks other important qualities like compassion or creativity or wisdom.
Right. This reminds me of those like get rich quick schemes.
Oh, yeah.
They promise wealth without any real substance. They prey on people's desires for, financial security, but often lead to disappointment and financial ruin.
Right. It's important to remember that wealth doesn't guarantee, happiness or truth. There are many other ways to measure a person's worth or the validity of their ideas.
I'm starting to realize just how pervasive these fallacies are.
I know, right?
They're everywhere.
They really are. But don't get discouraged.
Okay.
The more you learn about them, the easier it will be to, spot them and to avoid being misled by, faulty reasoning.
Words to live by. It's like we've unlocked some secret code to like understanding arguments.
Right.
I'm starting to see these fallacies everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
From news headlines to social media posts to just everyday conversations.
It's eye-opening, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Once you start recognizing these patterns of flawed reasoning, it's hard to unsee them. Speaking of patterns, this next fallacy, it plays on our tendency to see connections where none actually exist. It's called cum hoc ergo propter hoc, which means with this, therefore because of this.
Okay, that sounds kind of familiar. Is that related to that post hoc fallacy we talked about earlier?
You're exactly right. While post hoc, it focuses on events happening in sequence. Cum hoc ergo propter hoc, it links events that occur simultaneously.
Okay, I'm with you.
It assumes that because two things happen at the same time, one must have caused the other.
So just because two things coincide, it doesn't mean they're causally connected.
Exactly. The book had this funny example. About statistics, a researcher discovers a strong correlation between neat handwriting and shoe size in children,
Okay.
and concludes that neat handwriting must somehow cause bigger feet.
That's hilarious. What's the real explanation?
It turned out that older children tend to have both neater handwriting and bigger feet, so age was like the confounding factor.
Ah, the hidden variable. It strikes again. It's a good reminder that correlation doesn't equal causation.
Absolutely. It's crucial to consider other possible explanations and look for evidence of, like, a direct causal link
Right.
before jumping to conclusions.
Right. Have you ever noticed how some people, they try to make their preferred option look better by highlighting the flaws in all the alternatives?
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Even if those flaws aren't really that relevant.
Right. It's like they're saying, well, my idea might not be perfect, but it's better than all these other terrible options.
Exactly.
That's the damning the alternatives fallacy.
Damning the alternatives.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
The book uses a political example. Imagine a candidate saying, you have a choice between a convicted criminal, a known liar, and me.
Whoa. Okay.
Right.
It's a classic tactic to make yourself look good just by association, even if your own qualifications are, questionable.
Exactly. It's like a job interview where you badmouth all the other candidates instead of focusing on your own strengths.
Okay. So have you ever been in an argument where they redefine a word
Oh, yeah.
or a phrase, right? Mid-debate, just to avoid admitting they're wrong.
Oh, yeah, all the time. Like
Uh-huh.
they're trying to move the goalposts so they can always claim victory.
Exactly.
That's the definitional retreat fallacy.
Definitional retreat.
They shift the meaning of a word or phrase after it's been challenged, hoping to make their argument seem more valid. The book actually offers an example. Imagine someone saying, I said I'd be home at a reasonable hour. I think 3 a.m. is reasonable, considering all I've been doing.
That's classic. Reinterpreting the rules to fit your own actions.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if they're even aware they're doing it.
Right. Have you ever encountered someone who they misinterpret those if-then statements? They assume that if the first part is false, then the second part must also be false.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine someone saying, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. It's not raining, therefore the ground is not wet. But the ground could be wet for other reasons.
Right, like a sprinkler or a recent spill. Just because it's not raining, it doesn't mean the ground can't be wet for other reasons.
Exactly. That's the denying the antecedent fallacy.
Denying the antecedent.
It's
like...
about misinterpreting the logic of a cause and effect relationship.
Okay, so have you ever noticed how some people make sweeping statements about, entire groups of people? And they assume that what's true for the group, it must be true for every single individual within that group.
Oh, yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
Like those stereotypes that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's so unfair to judge individuals based on, generalizations about their group.
Exactly. That's the dicto simpliciter fallacy.
Dicto simpliciter.
Right. It applies a general rule to a specific case, without considering, the exceptions. It's about ignoring the nuances and complexities of individual experiences.
Right. The book had an example that I think many of us can relate to. Everyone knows that teenagers are troublesome. This teenager isn't causing any problems, so he must be older than he looks.
Okay, that's funny. But it highlights how this fallacy can lead to, prejudice and discrimination. It's a reminder that we should judge people based on their individual merits and actions, not on stereotypes or assumptions about their group affiliations.
Absolutely. Okay, here's another fallacy that plays on our tendency to overgeneralize. Imagine someone saying, I visited France once, and the food was amazing. French cuisine is the best in the world.
Okay, but that's just one person's experience. Right. It doesn't represent all of French cuisine.
Exactly. That's the division fallacy.
Fashion, okay.
It assumes that what's true for the whole must also be true for, all the parts. It's like assuming that all Americans love baseball just because it's a popular sport in the U.S.
Or that all Canadians love hockey.
Right, exactly.
We need to remember that individuals within a group, they can have very different tastes and experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you ever been in a conversation where someone uses the same word in different ways to make their argument seem more convincing?
Oh, yeah. It's like they're trying to trick you with, wordplay or something.
Exactly. That's the equivocation fallacy.
Verification, okay.
It relies on the ambiguous meaning of words, to create confusion or to mislead the audience. The book gives a classic example.
Oh, okay, let's hear it.
Elephants are not found in Britain. So if you have one, don't lose it or you'll never find it again.
Okay, that's a fun one. That's a clever play on the word found.
Right. The first use of found refers to elephants existing in the wild. The second use refers to locating something that's been lost. It's a humorous example, but it highlights how equivocation can be used to, make nonsensical arguments seem plausible.
Yeah, this one feels particularly relevant in today's world where people often twist words and phrases to, fit their own agendas.
Absolutely. It's more important than ever to pay attention to the nuances of language and to challenge statements that seem slippery or ambiguous.
Okay, so this next fallacy, it's all about appealing to supposed, common knowledge as if that just makes it true. It's like saying, well, everyone knows that.
That's the every schoolboy knows fallacy.
Every schoolboy knows, okay.
It tries to shut down critical thinking by claiming that something is so obvious or so widely accepted that it just doesn't need to be proven. The book uses a funny example.
Hit me.
Every schoolboy knows that ancient disasters were caused by cosmic disturbances.
Okay, but even if that were true, that wouldn't necessarily explain, all ancient disasters?
Right.
And who's to say what every schoolboy actually knows?
Exactly.
It's a way to avoid providing evidence by appealing to, a supposed shared understanding.
Exactly. This fallacy, it can be used to perpetuate myths, stereotypes, outdated beliefs, just by claiming that Everyone knows them to be true. It's a very powerful tool for maintaining the status quo and resisting change. Okay, here's a fallacy that seems uh, to defy logic.
Okay, I'm ready.
It's called the exception that proves the rule.
Okay, wait. How can an exception prove a rule? Doesn't it, like, do the opposite?
You're right.
Okay.
This fallacy argues that an exception to a rule, it actually confirms the rule, which is absurd. The book gives a literary example. No fictional character ever attracted fan clubs in distant countries like pop stars do.
Hmm.
Sherlock Holmes does, of course, but he's simply the exception that proves the rule.
But if an exception exists, doesn't that weaken the rule?
Exactly. The presence of an exception, it suggests that the rule isn't like absolute or universally applicable.
Right.
This fallacy is often used to just like dismiss inconvenient evidence that challenges a cherished belief.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this next one sounds a bit technical. Exclusive premises.
It does involve a bit of formal logic.
Okay.
This fallacy occurs when someone uses two negative premises
Yeah.
in a syllogism,
Mm.
leading to an invalid conclusion.
A syllogism. Remind me what that is again.
Okay, so a syllogism is a type of like a logical argument. It consists of three parts:
Mm.
a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
For example, all dogs are mammals. Fido is a dog, therefore Fido is a mammal.
Right. Classic syllogism.
Right. The exclusive premises fallacy tries to do something similar,
Uh-huh.
but it uses two negative premises.
Okay.
Like, no cats are dogs and no dogs are birds, therefore no cats are birds.
Mm.
Okay.
So the conclusion might be true, but the logic seems kind of off.
Exactly. The problem is that you need at least one affirmative premise to establish like a valid connection between the terms.
So it's like trying to build a bridge with two broken planks.
Wow.
You just can't get from one side to the other.
Exactly. Now, this next fallacy, it explores the tricky relationship between language and existence.
Ooh, okay.
It's called the existential fallacy.
Existential fallacy. Okay, sounds deep. Does this involve pondering the meaning of life?
Not quite, but it does touch on the nature of reality.
Okay.
The existential fallacy, it occurs when we draw a conclusion that implies the existence of something
Mm-hmm.
based on premises that don't actually guarantee that existence.
Okay.
For example, all cats are selfish, therefore some cats are selfish.
Okay, but that first statement, it doesn't actually tell us whether any cats actually exist.
Right.
It only tells us that if cats exist, they are selfish.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
like saying all unicorns have horns without proving that unicorns actually exist.
Right. This reminds me of those like philosophical debates about whether a tree falling in a forest makes a sound if no one is there to hear it.
Exactly. It highlights the difference between making statements about the properties of things and proving that those things actually exist in the first place.
Okay. This next fallacy sounds like it involves some creative data interpretation,
Okay.
ex post facto statistics.
Ex post facto statistics.
Mm.
It's all about looking back at past events and claiming they were more predictable than they actually were. The book had a fun example.
Okay, I like fun examples.
Imagine someone saying, I met my aunt in Trafalgar Square. Think of the hundreds of thousands of people there that day. What are the chances we would meet? Maybe we're telepathic.
Okay, that's a fun way to spin a coincidence, but it doesn't actually prove anything about telepathy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's easy to look back at events and like see patterns or connections that weren't apparent at the time.
Right.
But this doesn't mean those events were predetermined or that we could have predicted them.
Right. It's like buying a lottery ticket and then claiming you knew you would win all along.
Exactly. This fallacy can lead to, superstitious thinking
Mm-hmm.
and a distorted view of reality. It's important to remember that many events are simply random
Mm.
or unpredictable.
Right. Okay, so this next fallacy might resonate with anyone who's ever, like, been tempted by games of chance.
Yeah.
It's the gambler's fallacy.
Ah, the gambler's fallacy.
Classic. It's that belief that past outcomes in a random event, they can influence future outcomes. Like flipping a coin and assuming that if it lands on heads 5 times in a row, it's more likely to land on tails the next time.
You got it. The gambler's fallacy ignores the fact that like each coin flip is an independent event.
Right.
And past results have no bearing on the probability of future outcomes.
So even if a roulette wheel lands on red 100 times in a row, the odds of it landing on black on the next spin are still the same?
Exactly. Each spin is independent of the previous ones.
Okay.
This fallacy can lead to people making irrational bets or taking unnecessary risks.
Yeah, I can definitely see how this fallacy would be especially dangerous in, situations involving like gambling or investing.
Absolutely. It's important to remember that random events don't have a memory, and past outcomes don't influence future probabilities.
Okay, so have you ever heard someone dismiss an idea just because they don't like the person who proposed it?
Oh, yeah, all the time. It's like they're saying, well, I don't care what you're saying because I don't like you.
That's the genetic fallacy in
The
action.
genetic fallacy. Okay.
It rejects an argument or idea solely based on its origin or source, rather than like on its merits.
Mm-hmm.
The book gives a historical example.
All right.
Don't be obsessed with punctuality. It was Mussolini who wanted the trains to run on time.
Okay, but the value of punctuality, it shouldn't depend on whether a dictator valued it or not.
Exactly.
It's a separate issue.
This fallacy ignores the fact that, like, good ideas can come from unexpected sources,
Mm-hmm.
and bad ideas can come from seemingly reputable sources.
It's a good reminder to evaluate ideas based on their content, not on the character or beliefs of the person who proposed them. Right. We should be open to considering ideas from, like, all sources,
Yeah.
even if we don't agree with the person's overall worldview.
Okay, have you ever noticed how some people, they use, like, qualifying words or phrases
Mm-hmm.
to make their statements seem stronger than they actually are?
Oh, yeah.
But it leaves them a loophole to, like, backpedal if challenged.
Oh, yeah, like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Exactly.
Make a bold claim, but leave themselves an escape route.
Right.
That's the half-concealed qualification fallacy.
Have concealed qualification. Okay.
They make a statement with a hidden qualification.
Uh-huh.
It allows them to retreat to that qualification if needed.
Mm-hmm.
The book gives an example. Practically every single case of this disease has been fatal.
Okay, yeah, that practically it creates a lot of wiggle room.
Right.
It allows them to claim that they weren't making an absolute statement,
Mhm.
if a non-fatal case emerges.
Exactly. It's a way to create the illusion of certainty while hedging their bets. You see this a lot in advertising and political rhetoric.
It's like a politician saying, I will never raise taxes, but then adding under their breath, unless it's absolutely necessary.
Exactly. They're leaving themselves an out.
Right.
It's important to pay attention to those, qualifying words and phrases
Mm-hmm.
because they can significantly alter the meaning of a statement. Speaking of leaving yourself an out, this next fallacy, it's all about avoiding commitment.
Okay. A commitment phobic fallacy. I like it.
It's called hedging.
Hedging.
It involves using ambiguous language, right,
Mm-hmm.
to avoid making a definite statement.
Okay.
It allows the speaker to later, shift their position if needed. The book has a political example.
Okay.
The last thing we want in the Middle East is an all-out war.
Okay, but what exactly constitutes like an all-out war?
Right.
That statement leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The speaker could later claim that they weren't ruling out, a limited military action or, a targeted strike.
It's like saying, I'll be there around 6, but without specifying AM or PM?
Exactly. Hedging allows, politicians or diplomats to appear decisive while maintaining flexibility. It's a way to avoid making concrete promises
Yeah.
or taking, a firm stance.
Okay. Have you ever noticed how some people, they try to discredit an argument just by, suggesting that the person making the argument is biased
Oh, yeah, all the time.
or has a vested interest in the outcome?
Right. It's like they're saying, you can't trust their opinion because they're just saying that to benefit themselves.
Exactly.
That's the argumentum ad hominem circumstantial fallacy.
Argumentum ad hominem circumstantial. Okay.
It attacks the person's, circumstances or motivations instead of addressing the actual argument. The book had an example.
Okay.
It says, of course you'd say that. You're a member of that political party.
Okay, but a person's political affiliation, it doesn't automatically, invalidate their arguments.
Right.
They might have, other valid reasons for holding a particular view.
Exactly. It's important to, separate the argument from the person making it.
Right.
And evaluate the argument on its own merits.
Right. This fallacy often pops up in discussions about, controversial issues where people have strong opinions or vested interests.
Right. It's a reminder that we should focus on the content of the argument, not on the perceived motives of the person making it.
Speaking of motives, this next fallacy seems to prey on, a lack of knowledge.
Oh, yeah. Which one is that?
It's called argumentum ad ignorantium.
Argumentum ad ignorantium. Okay, yeah.
This fallacy argues that something must be true just because it hasn't been proven false, or vice versa. It's about, shifting the burden of proof.
Right. So saying no one has ever proven that ghosts don't exist, so they must be real.
Exactly. The absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence.
Right. Just because we haven't disproven something doesn't mean it's true.
Right. It's like saying no one has ever proven that there isn't a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, so it must be there.
Exactly. This fallacy is often used to justify beliefs in, like, conspiracy theories,
Mm.
paranormal phenomena, or any claim that, like, lacks substantial evidence.
It seems like people often use this fallacy when they want to believe something,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have any real proof to back it up.
Right.
It's easier to claim that the burden of proof lies on others to disprove their belief.
You've hit the nail on the head. Now, this next fallacy is all about misdirection.
Okay.
It's like a magician's sleight of hand,
Okay.
pulling your attention away from the real issue.
Okay, I'm ready for this magical fallacy. What's it called?
It's called ignoratio elenchi, which means ignorance of the refutation in Latin.
Ignorance of the refutation. Okay.
It's about proving something other than the point in question.
So it's like winning an argument, but not the argument that was actually being made.
Exactly. The book gives a political example.
Okay.
A politician might say, the opposition claims that we haven't done enough to combat poverty, but we have built new schools, hospitals, and roads.
Okay. Those might be good things,
Right.
but they don't directly address the issue of poverty. It's like responding to concerns about climate change by saying, well, we've planted a lot of trees.
Exactly. It's a distraction tactic designed to, shift the focus away from the real issue.
Right. It's important to stay focused on the central point of the argument and to avoid being sidetracked by irrelevant information or emotional appeals.
This one seems especially common in political debates, where candidates often try to, dodge tough questions or steer the conversation in a more favorable direction.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Okay, so have you ever noticed how some people, they try to dismiss an entire argument just by focusing on, attacking a single example
Oh, yeah,
that was used to support it?
all the time. It's
Yeah.
like they're saying, well, that one example might be flawed, so the whole argument must be wrong.
Exactly.
That's the refuting the example fallacy.
Refuting the example, okay.
It focuses on, attacking a specific instance or anecdote rather than addressing the underlying principle or the broader argument. The book had an example related to animal cruelty. Hunting isn't cruel. In this specific case, the fox actually died of natural causes before the hunters arrived.
But even if that one fox died naturally, it doesn't necessarily mean that all hunting is humane or ethical.
Exactly. This fallacy ignores the bigger picture and focuses on a single instance to try to dismiss the entire argument.
So it's like saying, well, that one vegan I met was really unhealthy, so veganism must be bad for you.
Right. It's a classic example of cherry-picking evidence to support a predetermined conclusion.
This fallacy can be especially dangerous when it comes to scientific or medical claims. Just because one study shows a certain result, it doesn't mean that it applies to everyone or that it's the final word on the matter.
Right. It's important to look at the totality of the evidence and to consider all sides of an issue before forming an opinion.
Well, I think our listeners are now equipped with an arsenal of fallacy spotting skills.
They're ready to be fallacy-fighting ninjas.
Exactly. So next time you find yourself in a debate or just listening to a persuasive argument, remember these fallacies and use your new ninja skills to cut through the BS and get to the heart of the matter.
And remember, even if you can't always win an argument, at least you can avoid being fooled by bad logic.
Absolutely. And you know what? Just being aware of these fallacies is a huge step in becoming a more critical thinker. So keep learning, keep questioning, and never stop sharpening those ninja skills.
And that's a wrap.